Right, so for World Book Day, the book that I'm reading is The Sound of Wales, and I have read this to children a few times. I love it because the characters are really, really good. They're really interesting. They live in a place where I am not that familiar with, so I love seeing and interacting with this place through their eyes and ears and everything else. And the book has a little bit of everything, a little bit of skullduggery, a little bit of I suppose you call it evil, really, a little bit of romance, and quite a lot of comedy. So I am going to just read the first chapter, which is quite a short chapter. It's only about five pages, but this will give you a little bit of a taste of what happens in the book. So chapter 1, The Sound of Wales. Walls of black water rose on either side of the boat as it dropped through a crack in the sea. In the wheelhouse, Fraser Dunbar clung to an old wooden chart table and waited for those walls to collapse and send him to the bottom. The windows rattled and the wind roared through the open doorway. The door banged hard on its hinges. He couldn't close it from where he stood, dared not move in case he slipped straight through the opening and out into the night. Ben McCaig glanced at him from behind the wheel. "How you doing?" he shouted above the wind. "Fine," Fraser lied. He had never been out in a sea in a storm before. It was thrilling to begin with, but now it was just scary. No one in their right minds would go out in this kind of sea, in this kind of weather, yet Ben was whooping like it was a fairground ride. "Are you going to be sick again?" he yelled. Fraser shook his head. "There's nothing left to puke." Ben laughed and spun the wheel. "My dad's going to kill me," Fraser shouted. "Not if this storm doesn't kill you first." It was a definite possibility, and only now did Fraser remember his father's fierce words that afternoon. You must not, under any circumstances, get on the boat again. McCaig is downright reckless, and that boat should have been scrapped. He'd ignored that advice. Had told himself that he was 14 and didn't take orders from anyone, not even his dad. Now it was both annoying and astonishing that perhaps his father knew best after all. As the boat plunged deeper into the dark sea and his stomach churned to muster, that he suddenly remembered the list his dad had taken great pleasure in sharing. The top 5 reasons why people drowned. Number 5, water sports accidents. That didn't apply. Number 4, alcohol consumption. Good. He hadn't touched a drop. Number 3, inability to swim. No problem. He could swim just fine. Number 2, failure to wear a life preserver. Fraser looked behind him at an ancient life jacket hanging on the wheelhouse wall. He could grab one if needed, but if Ben wasn't wearing a life jacket, then neither was he. Number 1, water conditions exceed swimming ability. He swallowed hard as he looked out at the ferocious ocean. He wasn't that good a swimmer. Nobody was. The walls of water were closing in. The little boat was about to be swallowed whole. Fraser let out a cry and hoped that Ben hadn't heard. Then at the last moment, the boat rose, grabbing an edge on the swell and riding it slowly, casually almost, out of the watery canyon. Despite its peeling paint and shabby deck, an old island lobster boat like this was built for these wild seas off the northwest of Scotland. Maybe they were not about to sink after all, Fraser thought. It seemed certain for a moment there. With one hand still on the wheel and his legs splayed for balance, Ben reached behind him and grabbed the banging door, pushing it shut and securing the catch. Fraser wiped a hand across his face, tasting salty water. Ben patted the wheel. "This old piece of junk might just get us home." He peered through the window. "The harbour's around here somewhere." The slow swish of a solitary wiper was fighting to keep the wheelhouse window clear. Fraser could see no signs of lights of Skullavik. And then he remembered why they were here in the first place, sailing so late at night. Where are the whales? Ben rubbed his stubbly chin. They will have dived to deeper water, I hope. It'll be a bit daft if we miss the harbour and hit a whale. The grin was gone. There was no more whooping. Whales were Ben's life. It was already a bit daft, Fraser thought, to go sailing into the night with clouds building and the wind picking up. But being with Dr. Ben McCaig, Professor of Marine Biology at Aberdeen University, was beyond cool. He'd even given Fraser a job title for the summer, Seasonal Voluntary Assistant Researcher, which meant General Dog's Body. But that was okay. It was enough that Ben let him come along, and it was something to do over the hot summer holidays. The island of Nain was not the most exciting of places at the best of times, and these were not the best of times on the little island. Ben pulled back on the throttle, and the throb of the engine died, the boat pitching hard. "I can't see a thing," he said. "I'll have to step outside to see where we are." He lunged out of the door, and Fraser staggered after him, with a glance at the unused life jackets. They stood with their backs against the wheelhouse and were pummeled by the wind and rain. The sea was dark, heaving mass, broken only by the white flash of breaking wave. It was impossible to tell where the water ended and the land began, but they could see the tops of cliffs, black against the grey tumbling clouds. With growing panic, Fraser scanned the coastline, working along from the cliffs to get his bearings. Twice he wiped eyes that stung from the spray. As his eyes refocused, he saw a dot of light further up the coast. It was too far out to be on land. "Another boat," Fraser said to Ben. But when he looked again, he couldn't find the light. He turned his head and saw the faint glow of other lights emerging from the darkness. It was Skolvig. Over there," he shouted, pointing. I see them," Ben said. "We're half a mile too far north. 5 more minutes sailing on the same heading, and we will have hit the cliffs." He turned for the wheelhouse. "Let's go home." Fraser breathed a sigh of relief, as deep as the ocean. The wind and the waves and the rocks would have to hang up some other night and try to sink their little boat. He looked again for the other vessel that was sailing for the open ocean. There was no sign of it. He was stepping into the safety of the wheelhouse when he heard the cry. It was hard to hear anything above the roar of the wind, and for a moment he thought he imagined it. But it came again, and this time he recognised a word. Help. Fraser lurched across the deck, held out to the rail with both hands as he leant over the water. Came again, louder this time, clearer. "Help me!" There was someone in the water. "Did you hear that?" he shouted at the wheelhouse. "Hear what?" "A cry for help." Ben leant out, cocked an ear for a few seconds, then frowned and shook his head. "Just the wind playing tricks." Fraser had heard something. He was certain of it. He focused his ears towards the ocean and listened. The wind roared and the sea boomed and the engine breathed beneath his feet, clunked back to life as Ben pushed forward on the throttle. He could hear nothing else. He scanned the ocean, but for the water was black and turbulent. It was impossible to fix his gaze on any one spot. But towards the cliff there was something. A hand. An arm, maybe. And was that a head? Or just a breaking whitecap? Fraser shouted back at the wheelhouse, but Ben couldn't hear. The other light. It had to be another boat. Had it lost one of its crew? Had it sunk? He staggered back to the wheelhouse, pulled himself through the door. "There's someone in the water," he said breathlessly, urgently. "You're imagining it, Fraser," said Ben. He was concentrating now, making sure they got back to harbour. "I saw something." "Aye, the waves. I saw an arm." Ben fixed him with a troubled look. "Are you certain?" Fraser hesitated. He was certain. Was it not just a breaking wave? His confidence began to fade the more he thought about it. Ben saw the uncertainty. "In the dark, your eyes play tricks. But not your ears as well. I heard a cry. The wind. No, a voice. We have to turn round. We're almost at the harbour. We're getting out of this storm before we go under. But the person in the water. There's no one, Fraser. There is. I'll chase whales in the dark, but I'm not chasing ghosts. Fraser wanted to argue, but he saw Ben's narrow eyes and firm mouth, and he knew it was useless. He peered through the glass of the wheelhouse at the stormy night. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe he had imagined it, but he couldn't stop thinking. There was someone out there among the waves, crying for help and disappearing under the black water. If you want to see who's in the waves, if it was a ghost, if it was a person, what happens to Fraser, read this.